Picture this: a pregnant wife finds a single earring in her billionaire husband's car. What happens next will shatter everything she thought she knew about love and loyalty. This isn't just another scandal, it's the story of how a tech mogul's perfect life became a federal crime scene, and how the woman he tried to erase became the architect of his downfall. But here's what nobody saw coming: the Mistress, the FBI evidence, and a plot so twisted it sounds like fiction. If you think you know how this ends, you're wrong. Hit like if you're ready for a tale of betrayal deeper than you imagined. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, where justice wins, are exactly why this channel exists. Trust me, you'll want to hear every detail of how Sarah Matthews went from broken victim to the woman who brought down a $2 billion empire. Let's dive in. Sarah Matthews stood in the pristine white nursery of their Malibu mansion, carefully arranging tiny clothes in the mahogany dresser. At 7 months pregnant, her movements were deliberate and graceful. The ocean view through floor-to-ceiling windows painted everything in golden afternoon light. "Perfect," she whispered, smoothing her hand over her rounded belly. After 3 years of marriage to tech billionaire Jonathan Sterling, this baby represented everything she had dreamed of: a complete family in their perfect world. The sound of Jack's Tesla pulling into their circular driveway made her heart flutter with anticipation. He had been away on another business trip to Seattle, closing deals that would make their IPO launch next month even more spectacular. "Honey, I'm home." Jack's voice echoed through the marble foyer. Sarah hurried downstairs as fast as her pregnancy allowed. Jack stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair slightly tousled, that megawatt smile that had first captured her heart at a marketing conference 5 years ago. "I missed you so much," she said, melting into his embrace. "Missed you too. Beautiful." His kiss felt different somehow, distant, mechanical. "How's our little one?" "Active as always. The doctor says everything looks perfect." Sarah studied his face, noting the slight tension around his eyes. "How was Seattle?" "Exhausting but productive. The investors are beyond excited about our launch." Jack loosened his tie, avoiding her gaze. "I need a shower. Long flight." As he headed upstairs, Sarah decided to bring in his luggage from the car. She had always been the type to take care of details, part of what made her such a successful marketing executive before she became Jack's wife. The Tesla's trunk held his familiar black leather bag, but as she lifted it, something caught the afternoon sun on the passenger seat: a delicate silver earring with a distinctive blue stone. Sarah's breath caught. The earring was beautiful, expensive, and definitely not hers. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The metal was warm, as if recently worn. This was not some forgotten piece from a business dinner or conference. This was intimate, personal. "Jack," she called, climbing the stairs with deliberate calm. The shower was already running. She sat on their bed, the earring burning in her palm like evidence of a crime she didn't want to acknowledge. When Jack emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, Sarah held up the earring. "I found this in your car." His expression shifted so subtly that someone who hadn't known him for 5 years might have missed it. But Sarah caught the microsecond of calculation before his face transformed into concerned confusion. "Where did you find that?" "Your passenger seat." Jack walked over, took the earring, and examined it with the focused attention of a man solving a puzzle. "I have no idea how this got there. Maybe the cleaning service dropped it, or it fell out of someone's purse during a business lunch." "Jack, this was sitting right on the seat. Not hidden, not forgotten. It was like someone just took it off." "Sarah," his voice took on that gentle, patient tone that always made her feel slightly foolish. "You're 7 months pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place. you're seeing threats that aren't there. I'm not imagining this earring. Of course not. The earring is real, but your interpretation of what it means. He sat beside her, taking her hands in his. Baby, you know I love you more than anything. You and our child are my whole world. Why would I ever risk that? The reasonable tone, the logical explanation, the gentle redirect to her emotional state. It was a masterclass in manipulation, though Sarah couldn't name it yet. You're right, she said finally. I'm sorry. It's just... being apart from you makes me anxious. That's completely normal. Jack kissed her forehead. But you never have to worry about my loyalty. You're stuck with me forever, Mrs. Sterling. As he dressed for dinner, Sarah tucked the earring into her jewelry box. Something deep in her gut whispered that this perfect life was about to shatter, but she pushed the feeling down. After all, Jack was right. She was just being hormonal. 3 days later, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Jack was attentive as always, but there was a quality to his attention that felt performed rather than genuine. She found herself studying him during dinner, noting how he checked his phone more frequently, how his smiles seemed to require effort. When she mentioned her sister Rebecca's upcoming visit, Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Rebecca's coming here. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Just for a few days. She wants to help with baby preparations. Sarah had been looking forward to reconnecting with her sister after months of estrangement over Rebecca's concerns about Jack. I thought you two weren't speaking. We weren't. But she reached out, and with the baby coming. Sarah shrugged. Family is important. Jack resumed eating, but she noticed he'd lost his appetite. Of course, I just worry about stress levels. You know how Rebecca can be, always stirring up drama. The comment stung because it held a grain of truth. Rebecca, an investigative journalist, had an unfortunate tendency to probe and question everything. But she was also fiercely protective of those she loved. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to Jack's breathing. When she was certain he was asleep, she carefully reached for his phone on the nightstand. It was locked, of course, but she knew his passcode, their anniversary date. The phone opened, and her heart hammered as she scrolled through his messages. Most were business-related, but then she found a thread that made her blood run cold. Missing you already. Can't wait until after the IPO when we can finally be together properly. M. Soon. Beautiful. Just need to handle a few loose ends first. J. What kind of loose ends? M. Nothing for you to worry about. Trust me. J. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled up, finding weeks of intimate messages, photos that made her stomach lurch, plans for weekends away that coincided exactly with Jack's business trips. The most recent exchange was from that very evening. How did Sarah react to finding my earring, M? Exactly as predicted, she apologized for being suspicious. J. You're terrible. I love it. M. She's so trusting, it's almost boring. You're much more fun. J. Sarah set the phone down with careful precision, afraid that any sudden movement might cause her to shatter entirely. The woman's name in his contacts was simply Madison P., but the intimacy of their exchanges left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. But what made it truly devastating was the calculated nature of Jack's responses. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a midlife crisis. This was methodical, deliberate betrayal. The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her distress, and Sarah placed her hand protectively over her belly. Whatever was happening between Jack and this Madison person, she had to think about her child first. The next morning, Jack left early for meetings, kissing her goodbye with the same mechanical affection she was beginning to recognize as performance. Once his car disappeared down their winding driveway, Sarah called Rebecca. "I need to see you," she said without preamble when her sister answered. "Sarah, what's wrong? You sound terrible. Can you come today instead of next week?" "Of course. What's happened?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "I think Jack is having an affair." 3 hours later, Rebecca sat in Sarah's kitchen, her sharp journalist's eyes taking in every detail as Sarah recounted finding the earring and the text messages. "We need to be smart about this," Rebecca said. "If Jack is cheating, there might be financial implications you haven't considered. Men who betray their wives often betray them in multiple ways." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you need to know exactly what your financial situation is before you confront him. Assets, accounts, business holdings, all of it." Sarah had always left financial matters to Jack. It seemed reasonable. He was the business genius, after all. But now that trust felt naive. "I can help you," Rebecca continued. "I know people who can investigate properly. But Sarah, you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Men like Jack don't give up their comfortable lives without a fight." As if summoned by their conversation, Jack's Tesla appeared in the driveway. Rebecca quickly gathered her things. "Don't let on that you know anything yet," she whispered. "And Sarah, whatever you find out, remember that this is not your fault. You are not responsible for his choices." But as Sarah watched Jack stride up the walkway with that confident smile, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow failed to be enough. The perfect life she had built was crumbling, and she was only just beginning to understand how far she had to fall. Rebecca wasted no time. Within 24 hours, she had connected Sarah with Marcus Rivera, a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases involving high-net-worth individuals. They met at a small coffee shop in Santa Monica, far from Jack's usual haunts. Marcus was a compact man in his 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who had heard every variation of betrayal. "Tell me everything," he said, sliding a retainer agreement across the small table. Sarah recounted the earring, the text messages, and her growing suspicions about Jack's business trips. As she spoke, Marcus took notes without judgment or surprise. "The woman's name is Madison Pierce," Sarah said. "At least, that's what his contact list says." Marcus nodded. "I'll start there. In cases like these, we usually find that affairs are just the beginning. Men who compartmentalize their lives this effectively often have other secrets." "What do you mean, Afurur? Financial irregularities, hidden assets, sometimes even other relationships? I'll look into everything. Bank records, property holdings, business transactions. You need the complete picture before making any decisions." Sarah signed the agreement with trembling hands. A week ago, her biggest concern had been choosing the right crib sheets. Now she was hiring someone to investigate her husband's secret life. How long will this take? 2 weeks for a preliminary report, maybe 3 for the full scope. And Mrs. Sterling, don't change your behavior at all. Act exactly as you have been. Men like your husband are often more observant than they appear. That evening, Sarah sat through dinner with Jack, making conversation about the IPO launch while studying his face for signs of deception. He seemed relaxed, even affectionate, which somehow made everything worse. "You seem quiet tonight," Jack observed over dessert. "Just tired. The baby's been more active lately. Maybe you should see Dr. Martinez earlier than planned. Make sure everything's okay." His concern appeared genuine, which created a cognitive dissonance that left Sarah feeling dizzy. How could someone who claimed to love her so completely betray her so thoroughly after Jack went to bed? Sarah found herself wandering through their house, seeing it with new eyes. The original artwork, the imported furniture, the smart home technology, all of it felt like set pieces in an elaborate performance rather than the foundation of a real life. She paused in the nursery, running her hand over the crib they had assembled together just last month. Jack had been so excited about becoming a father, or at least he had seemed to be. Now she wondered if that, too, had been performance. The next few days passed in a strange suspension of reality. Sarah went through the motions of her normal routine, prenatal yoga, lunch with friends, preparing for the baby, while internally counting down to Marcus's report. Jack seemed oblivious to her inner turmoil, which struck her as either remarkably self-absorbed or calculatedly cruel. He brought her flowers, rubbed her feet, and talked enthusiastically about baby names, all while carrying on his affair with someone named Madison. On the fourth day of waiting, Sarah couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. She searched social media for Madison Pierce and found her immediately. The woman was stunning, 26 years old with the kind of effortless beauty that came from good genetics and expensive maintenance. Her Instagram showed a lifestyle of luxury travel, designer clothes, and carefully curated sophistication. But what made Sarah's blood run cold were the location tags. Madison had been in Seattle during Jack's business trip. She had been in San Francisco when Jack attended a conference there. Every location matched his supposed business travel perfectly. Worse, Madison's recent post showed her in what appeared to be expensive maternity wear, though she was hiding it artfully behind strategic poses and loose clothing. Sarah stared at one particular photo, Madison in a flowing dress, hands positioned carefully over what looked like a 7 or 8 month pregnant belly, captioned simply with a heart emoji. The phone slipped from Sarah's hands, clattering onto the marble floor of their kitchen. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Madison wasn't just Jack's mistress, she was carrying his child too, and based on her apparent stage of pregnancy, she was further along than Sarah. Sarah's mind reeled as she calculated dates. If Madison was 8 months pregnant, the affair had started before Jack and Sarah had even begun trying for a baby. Their entire conception journey, the fertility tracking, the romantic attempts, the joy when they finally succeeded, had all occurred while Jack was already expecting a child with someone else. Rebecca arrived within an hour of Sarah's frantic phone call, finding her sister curled on the couch in the nursery, staring at the empty crib. "She's pregnant," Sarah whispered. "Further along than me." Rebecca sat beside her, wrapping an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "I'm so sorry. He was with her first, which means when he was telling me how much he wanted our baby..." Sarah's voice broke. "It was all a lie." "Not necessarily. People are complicated. He might genuinely want both children." "That's supposed to make me feel better." "No, nothing about this is supposed to make you feel better. This is devastating, and you have every right to fall apart." Rebecca paused. "But after you fall apart, you need to get angry, and then you need to get smart." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah heard Jack's car in the driveway. Rebecca quickly helped her compose herself and retreated to the guest room. Jack found Sarah in the living room, reading What to Expect When You're Expecting, with an expression of studied calm. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Quiet. Restful." Sarah looked up with a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "How were your meetings?" "Productive. The IPO timeline is accelerating. We might launch earlier than expected." "That's wonderful." Jack studied her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. For just a moment, she wondered if he could sense that she knew. But then his expression cleared, and he leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I'm going to grab a quick shower before dinner." As his footsteps faded up the stairs, Sarah realized she was holding her breath. Living with Jack now felt like sharing space with a predator who might strike at any moment. She just didn't realize yet that he already had. Marcus's preliminary report arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered by encrypted email to an account Rebecca had set up for Sarah. What they found was worse than either sister had imagined. Madison Pierce was indeed pregnant, 8 months along based on social media evidence and public records Marcus had uncovered. But the financial investigation revealed something even more devastating. "Look at this," Rebecca said, pointing to a series of transactions on her laptop screen. They were sitting in Sarah's car in a Whole Foods parking lot, the only place Sarah felt safe reviewing the evidence. Over the past 6 months, Jack has been systematically moving money out of your joint accounts and into offshore holdings. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. He's liquidated stocks, sold bonds, even taken a massive loan against this house. Sarah stared at the numbers, which seemed to blur together. How much? Conservatively, he's moved or leveraged about $12 million of what should be marital assets. $12 million. Sarah's voice was barely audible. And that's just what Marcus could trace. There's likely more. Rebecca scrolled down to another section. He's also been paying for an apartment in Manhattan Beach. Guess who the lease is under? Sarah didn't need to guess. Madison. Rent, utilities, groceries, a car lease. He's been supporting her completely. And Sarah, there are medical bills, expensive ones, private obstetrician, luxury birthing suite reservations at Cedars-Sinai. The full scope of Jack's deception was overwhelming. This wasn't just an affair or even a double life. This was systematic financial fraud against his own wife. What about the business, the IPO? That's where it gets really interesting. Rebecca pulled up another document. Sterling Technologies is about to go public, valued at over $200 million. But here's the thing. Jack has been restructuring the company ownership. Your original stake has been diluted to almost nothing. Sarah remembered signing papers over the past few months, documents Jack had presented as routine corporate restructuring for the IPO. She had trusted him completely, barely glancing at the legal language. I signed away my own stake in his company. It looks like it. Sarah, when this IPO launches, Jack is going to be worth a fortune, and you're going to have almost no legal claim to any of it. The magnitude of his betrayal was staggering. Jack hadn't just cheated on her emotionally and sexually. He had systematically stolen their future. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual cruelty of it, sending loving messages while destroying her life, made something snap inside Sarah's chest. "I'm going to confront him," she said. "Sarah, no, not yet. We need more evidence, and you need a lawyer first. I can't keep pretending. I can't keep smiling and asking about his day while he's doing this to us." Rebecca grabbed her sister's arm. "Listen to me. Men like Jack are dangerous when cornered. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. You confronting him without proper preparation gives him all the advantage." But Sarah was no longer listening. The baby kicked sharply, as if responding to her emotional distress, and she placed both hands protectively over her belly. "He's stealing from his own child's future," she whispered. "How do I just sit back and let that happen?" "You don't, but you do it smart. Marcus has more investigating to do, and I've already reached out to David Chen. He's a divorce attorney who specializes in high asset cases. We meet with him tomorrow." That night, Sarah lay in bed beside Jack, listening to his easy, unburdened sleep. How could someone compartmentalize so completely? How could he make love to her, discuss baby names, and plan their future while simultaneously planning her destruction? Around 3 in the morning, Jack's phone buzzed with a message. In his sleep, he reached for it automatically, and Sarah saw the preview on the lock screen. Had another ultrasound today. Baby looks perfect. Can't wait to tell the world she's yours. Madison was having a daughter. Sarah slipped out of bed and into the bathroom, where she finally allowed herself to break down completely. She sobbed into a towel to muffle the sound, grieving not just for her marriage, but for the naive woman she had been just weeks ago. The woman who had trusted completely, loved without reservation, and believed that good intentions were always rewarded with good outcomes. That woman was gone forever. When she emerged from the bathroom, composed and dry-eyed, Jack was awake. "You okay?" he asked sleepily. "Heard you get up." "Just pregnancy stuff. Go back to sleep." But as Jack drifted off again, Sarah made a decision. She was done being a victim in her own life. Whatever came next, she was going to fight. She just had no idea how brutal that fight was about to become. David Chen's law office was everything Sarah expected from a high-powered divorce attorney. Mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling law books, and an air of expensive competence. David himself was younger than she had anticipated, maybe 45, with kind eyes behind designer glasses. "I've reviewed Marcus's preliminary findings," he said without preamble. "We have a strong case for asset recovery, but timing is critical. Once the IPO launches, untangling the finances becomes exponentially more complex." Sarah sat across from his desk, Rebecca beside her for moral support. "What do you recommend? We need to move fast." "File for legal separation immediately. Freeze all joint accounts and get restraining orders on the assets. But Sarah, I have to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Men who plan financial fraud this elaborate don't go quietly." "How ugly?" David exchanged a look with Rebecca. "In my experience, they often try to discredit their wives, make them look unstable, unfit, or vindictive, especially when there's a pregnancy involved." "What does that mean?" "It means Jack might try to paint you as an unstable, expectant mother who's having paranoid delusions about his fidelity. He might claim you're mentally unfit to be a mother." The idea was so breathtakingly cruel that Sarah initially couldn't process it. But as she thought about Jack's response to finding the earring, the gentle suggestion that her hormones were making her paranoid, she realized David might be right. "He's already started that narrative," she said slowly. "When I found evidence of the affair, he immediately suggested I was being hormonal and irrational. Classic gaslighting technique. Sarah, I need you to be prepared for this to escalate quickly. We're going to file papers tomorrow, which means Jack will be served within 48 hours. After that, the gloves come off." That evening, Sarah attended the Sterling Technologies IPO launch party at the Beverly Hills Hotel. She had considered skipping it, but David advised her to maintain normalcy for as long as possible. The ballroom was filled with investors, tech industry leaders, and Los Angeles elite. Sarah wore a flowing black maternity dress that made her look elegant and composed, even though she felt like she was dying inside. Jack was in his element, working the room with his characteristic charisma, watching him charm potential investors and accept congratulations. Sarah marveled at how completely he could compartmentalize his life. "You look beautiful tonight," he said when he found her by the champagne table, holding a glass of sparkling cider. "Thank you. You seem happy." "I am. This IPO represents everything we've worked for. Our child is going to grow up with every advantage imaginable." The casual reference to "our child," while he was simultaneously planning a future with another woman and her child, made Sarah's stomach turn. "Jack, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made his expression shift slightly. "What is it?" Sarah had planned this moment carefully. She was going to be calm, direct, and give him one chance to come clean before the lawyers took over. I know about Madison. Jack's face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, calculation, then smooth concern. The transformation took less than 3 seconds. Madison, who... Please don't insult my intelligence. Madison Pierce, your pregnant mistress. The word pregnant hit him like a physical blow, but he recovered quickly. Sarah, I think you're confused. Maybe we should sit down and... I saw the text messages. I know about the apartment. I know about the money you've been moving. Sarah's voice remained steady, though her heart was hammering. I just want to understand why. Jack looked around the crowded ballroom, clearly aware that their conversation was attracting attention. Let's not do this here. When then, after the IPO makes you rich enough to disappear, after Madison has your daughter? The word daughter made Jack flinch visibly. He hadn't realized Sarah knew the baby's gender. You don't understand what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then explain it to me. Make me understand how the man who claims to love me could steal from me while I'm carrying his child. The couple nearest them had stopped their own conversation to listen. Jack's jaw tightened as he realized they were creating a scene. Sarah, you're clearly upset and not thinking clearly. This is neither the time nor place. When is the time, Jack? When is it ever the right time to discuss how you've been living a double life? More people were staring now. Sarah could see Jack calculating the potential damage to his carefully crafted image. You're having an episode, he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. The pregnancy has been really hard on her, he added to the couple beside them. Mood swings, paranoia. The doctor warned us this might happen. The public gaslighting was so breathtaking that Sarah actually staggered in front of dozens of witnesses. Jack was painting her as mentally unstable while positioning himself as the concerned husband. An episode. Sarah's voice rose. You think finding out about your pregnant mistress is an episode? Sarah, please, you're embarrassing yourself. But before Sarah could respond, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself face to face with Madison Pierce. The woman was even more stunning in person, and her pregnancy was impossible to miss. She wore a fitted red dress that accentuated her advanced state, and her smile was predatory. Jack, darling, Madison said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent area around them. Are you going to introduce me to your wife? The word wife came out with just enough emphasis to make it sound temporary. Sarah stared at Jack, waiting for him to deny knowing Madison, to maintain his facade of innocence. Instead, she watched his expression transform into something she had never seen before, cold, calculating, and entirely without remorse. Madison, I told you not to come tonight. I wanted to meet the woman who's been keeping my baby's father so busy. Madison's hand moved to her belly in a gesture that was unmistakably possessive. The crowd around them had grown larger, sensing drama. Sarah could see phones being raised, society photographers moving closer. Your baby, Sarah's voice was barely audible. Due in 3 weeks, Madison said with a brilliant smile. Jack chose the better mother. Didn't you, sweetheart? The public humiliation was complete. Sarah stood in a ballroom full of Los Angeles elite, watching her husband's pregnant mistress stake her claim while society photographers captured every moment. Security, Jack called out, his voice carrying absolute authority. My wife is having a medical emergency. She needs to be escorted out for her own safety. 2 men in black suits appeared at Sarah's elbows before she could process what was happening. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, one said gently but firmly. I'm not having a medical emergency, Sarah said, but her voice sounded weak and disoriented even to her own ears. The stress of pregnancy can cause all kinds of delusions, she heard Jack saying to someone behind her. We've been dealing with this for weeks. As the security guards guided her toward the exit, Sarah caught glimpses of the crowd's faces, some sympathetic, some curious, all recording her destruction for social media. The last thing she saw before the ballroom doors closed was Madison standing beside Jack, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching Sarah's exit with identical expressions of satisfaction. She had been completely, publicly, and methodically destroyed, and this was only the beginning. The headlines appeared within hours. Tech billionaire's wife suffers public breakdown at IPO celebration. The photos were even worse, Sarah looking disheveled and confused as security escorted her out, contrasted with images of Jack comforting a beautiful pregnant woman. The narrative was perfect and devastating unstable wife versus supportive husband and his tragic situation. Sarah sat in Rebecca's guest room at dawn, scrolling through the coverage on her sister's laptop. Every major gossip site and business publication had picked up the story. They're calling me delusional, she said flatly. Look at this. Sources close to the family say Sarah Sterling has been struggling with pregnancy-related mental health issues for months. Rebecca snatched the laptop away. Stop torturing yourself. This is exactly what David warned us about. But it's working. Look at the comments. People believe him. And they did. The comment sections were filled with sympathy for Jack and speculation about Sarah's mental state. A few people defended her, but they were drowned out by the chorus of support for the victimized husband. David called at 7 a.m. We need to accelerate everything. File today. Freeze the accounts immediately. Jack's controlling the narrative right now, but we can't let him control the legal process. By noon, Sarah found herself in a downtown courthouse, formally filing for legal separation and asset protection. The papers were served to Jack at his office that afternoon, while he was conducting interviews about the IPO's success. His response was swift and brutal. Within hours, Jack had filed a counter-petition claiming Sarah was mentally unfit to make financial decisions due to pregnancy-related psychosis. He included medical records showing her recent anxiety prescriptions and statements from witnesses at the IPO party describing her erratic behavior. But the cruelest element was a recording, somehow. Jack had captured audio of Sarah's breakdown in their bathroom 3 nights earlier, when she had sobbed into a towel after seeing Madison's ultrasound photo. He bugged our own house, Sarah whispered, listening to the recording of her most private moment of pain being used as evidence of mental instability. David's expression was grim. This is more sophisticated than typical divorce warfare. Jack's been planning this for a long time. The next blow came that evening. Sarah returned to the Malibu house to find the locks changed and a security guard at the front gate. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I have instructions not to allow you on the property, the guard said apologetically. This is my house. I understand, but there's a restraining order. Mr. Sterling claims you've been making threats against him and his unborn child. Sarah stared at the man in disbelief. His unborn child, I'm carrying his child. Ma'am, I'm just following orders. You'll need to contact your attorney. Driving away from her own home, Sarah felt the full scope of Jack's planning become clear. He hadn't just been stealing money and conducting an affair. He had been systematically building a case to paint her as dangerous and unstable. The pregnancy that should have been her greatest protection had become her greatest vulnerability. That night, staying in Rebecca's guest room again, Sarah woke at 3 a.m. with severe cramping. The stress of the past week had been overwhelming, but this felt different, urgent, and frightening. Something's wrong, she told Rebecca, who immediately drove her to the hospital. The emergency room doctor was thorough but cautious in his diagnosis. You're showing signs of preterm labor, he said. We need to stop the contractions and keep you on bed rest for at least 48 hours. Is the baby okay? For now, yes. But stress can be a major trigger for premature labor. You need to find ways to minimize stress in your life. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of the advice. How could she minimize stress when her husband was systematically destroying her life while Sarah was in the hospital? Jack made his next move. He held a press conference, positioning himself as a concerned husband whose pregnant wife was having a mental health crisis. I ask for privacy during this difficult time, he said, looking appropriately somber. My wife is struggling with some very serious issues, and I'm focused on getting her the help she needs while protecting our unborn child. The performance was flawless. Jack appeared devoted, concerned, and slightly overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. When a reporter asked about the woman at the IPO party, he claimed she was a family friend who had tried to help calm Sarah down. Sarah became fixated on the idea that I was having an affair, he explained with just the right amount of pain in his voice. She's convinced that every woman in my life is somehow a threat. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose touch with reality. Watching the press conference from her hospital bed, Sarah realized she was witnessing a master class in public manipulation. Jack had managed to reframe his affair and financial fraud as symptoms of his wife's mental illness. He's going to win, she told David when he visited that evening. People believe him. He's winning the public relations battle, David agreed. But we still have the financial evidence. Courts care about facts, not public opinion. Do they look at these? Sarah showed him her phone, which had been buzzing with messages all day. Most were from reporters wanting comment, but some were from friends and acquaintances expressing concern about her condition. Everyone thinks I'm having a breakdown. Even people who've known me for years are questioning my sanity. David was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Is there any chance at all, that the stress of pregnancy has affected your judgment? Have you interpreted innocent situations as evidence of an affair? The question hit her like a physical blow. Her own attorney was beginning to doubt her. You want to see the evidence again? I've seen the evidence. I'm asking about your interpretation of it. Sarah stared at him, realizing that Jack's gaslighting had been so effective that even her own legal representation was questioning her sanity. The text messages were explicit. The financial records show clear theft. Madison Pierce is 8 months pregnant with his child. Sarah's voice was steady despite her exhaustion. None of that is interpretation. David, it's fact. But as she said the words, Sarah realized how the situation looked from the outside. A pregnant woman accusing her successful husband of elaborate deception, supported by evidence that could theoretically be misinterpreted by someone in an unstable mental state. Jack had created the perfect trap. Even when she was telling the truth, Sarah looked like she was having paranoid delusions, and the most terrifying part was that it was working. The next 3 weeks brought a cascade of disasters that seemed almost orchestrated in their precision. Sarah's temporary restraining order was overturned when Jack's legal team produced additional evidence of her instability, including testimony from their housekeeper claiming Sarah had been talking to herself and forgetting conversations. The financial accounts remained frozen, but Jack's lawyers argued successfully that this was causing him undue hardship during a critical business period. A judge, clearly influenced by the media coverage, granted him access to reasonable living expenses, which somehow included maintaining Madison's luxury apartment, But the cruelest blow came when Sarah's own sister began to waver. "I'm worried about you," Rebecca said during one of their increasingly tense conversations. "You're obsessing over every detail, seeing conspiracies everywhere. Maybe you should consider that the stress of pregnancy might be affecting your perception." "Not you too. Sarah, I love you, but you haven't slept properly in weeks. You're picking apart every interaction, every statement, looking for hidden meanings. That's not healthy." "So Jack's story is that I'm paranoid, and your response is to suggest I'm being paranoid." Rebecca sighed. "I'm suggesting you might benefit from talking to someone. A therapist who specializes in prenatal mental health. A therapist who will diagnose me with pregnancy psychosis, giving Jack exactly what he needs for his custody case. A therapist who might help you distinguish between real threats and anxiety-driven fears." The conversation ended badly, with Rebecca suggesting that Sarah might need professional help, and Sarah accusing her sister of abandoning her when she needed support most. That night, alone in a cheap hotel room she could barely afford. Sarah went into premature labor. The contractions started around midnight, intense and regular. By the time the ambulance arrived, Sarah was hemorrhaging and barely conscious. She woke up in a hospital room 3 days later to find Dr. Martinez, her obstetrician, sitting beside her bed with an expression of profound sadness. "I'm sorry, Sarah. We did everything we could." The words didn't make sense at first. Sarah's mind felt foggy, drugged, unable to process what she was hearing. "What do you mean?" "You lost the baby. The stress-induced complications caused a placental abruption. There was nothing we could have done differently." The grief was immediate and overwhelming, but it was compounded by a terrible realization Jack now had exactly what he needed to destroy her completely. "Where is Jack, Dr. Martinez hesitated. "He's dealing with some legal issues related to your medical decisions. There was some confusion about who had authority to make choices while you were unconscious." What she didn't tell Sarah was that Jack had arrived at the hospital with legal documents claiming Sarah was mentally incompetent to make her own medical decisions. He had tried to gain control of her treatment while she was unconscious, ostensibly out of concern for her welfare. When Sarah was finally released from the hospital a week later, she discovered the full scope of the damage. The local news had covered her hospitalization as "disturbed wife of tech billionaire suffers tragic loss," with speculation about whether her mental state had contributed to the miscarriage. Jack held another press conference, this one from outside the hospital. He appeared devastated but resolute. "This tragedy has convinced me that Sarah needs intensive help," he said. "I'm prepared to pay for the best residential treatment available, but she has to be willing to acknowledge that she has a problem." The message was clear: submit to psychiatric treatment and admit mental illness, or be painted as a woman so unstable she had caused her own miscarriage. David Chen met Sarah at the hospital with grim news. "Jack's legal team is arguing that your recent behavior pattern, the accusations, the public scene, the hospitalization, demonstrates that you're not competent to handle your own financial affairs. They want to have you declared legally incompetent." Based on what? Based on a narrative they've been building for months. "Sarah, I have to be honest, from the outside, this looks very bad. You've accused your husband of elaborate financial fraud and maintaining a secret pregnant mistress. Then you had a very public breakdown, followed by a stress-induced miscarriage. To a judge who doesn't know the backstory, it could look like a woman having a complete mental breakdown. But the evidence is complicated. Financial records can be interpreted multiple ways. Text messages can be taken out of context. And now you don't have the credibility of being a stable, expectant mother." Sarah stared at him. "Are you saying Jack might win?" "I'm saying Jack is winning. The public believes his story. The courts are sympathetic to his position, and your own family is questioning your judgment. We need a game changer, or you're going to lose everything." That evening, Sarah sat in her hotel room scrolling through social media coverage of her situation. The comments were overwhelmingly sympathetic to Jack and critical of her. "She clearly has postpartum depression," one read, despite the fact that she had never actually given birth. "He's been so patient with her mental illness. I hope she gets the help she needs. My wife went through something similar during pregnancy. The hormones can make them completely irrational." But it was a comment from someone claiming to be a former colleague that broke her completely. "I worked with Sarah at her old marketing firm. She was always unstable, prone to dramatic accusations when things didn't go her way. This doesn't surprise me at all." The systematic destruction of her reputation was so complete that even her professional history was being rewritten to support Jack's narrative. Sarah turned off her phone and stared at the ceiling of the anonymous hotel room. She had lost her baby, her home, her financial security, and her reputation. Even her own sister doubted her sanity. Jack had won so completely that Sarah began to wonder if he might be right about her mental state. Maybe she was paranoid. Maybe grief and hormones had made her misinterpret innocent situations as evidence of betrayal. Maybe she really was losing her mind. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah considered Jack's offer of residential psychiatric treatment, at least in a facility. She wouldn't have to keep fighting battles she couldn't win. At least there. The voices telling her she was crazy would be trying to help rather than destroy her. As Sarah reached for her phone to call Jack's lawyer, she caught sight of herself in the hotel room mirror. The woman looking back was gaunt, hollow-eyed, and defeated. But in that moment of complete despair, something shifted. Maybe it was the absolute bottom that gave her nowhere to fall. Or maybe it was seeing how completely Jack's plan had succeeded. Either way, Sarah realized she had been fighting the wrong battle. She had been trying to prove her sanity to people who benefited from believing she was crazy. Instead, she needed to make Jack prove his innocence to someone who could actually do something about his guilt. The FBI. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's office was nothing like Sarah expected. Instead of the sterile psychiatric facility she had imagined, it was a warm space filled with books, plants, and soft lighting. Dr. Rodriguez herself was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an immediately trustworthy presence. "I specialize in helping people recover from narcissistic abuse," she explained during their first session. "What you've described, the systematic gaslighting, financial manipulation, and public discrediting. These are classic patterns. But what if I really am losing my mind? What if my grief over losing the baby has made me paranoid?" "Sarah, grief can certainly affect judgment and perception. But let's look at the timeline. Your suspicions began before your miscarriage, and they were based on concrete evidence, text messages, financial records, pregnancy announcements. Grief doesn't create evidence out of nothing." For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of validation. Someone was listening to her concerns without immediately questioning her mental state. "The hardest part," Sarah continued, "is that everyone believes him. Even my own sister thinks I might be having delusions." That's the point of systematic gaslighting. The abuser doesn't just manipulate the victim. They manipulate everyone around the victim to participate in questioning the victim's reality. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a chart showing the cycle of narcissistic abuse. "Look at this pattern. Love bombing, devaluation, discard, and hoovering. Where do you think you are in this cycle?" "Discard," Sarah said immediately. "He's trying to get rid of me completely." "Exactly. And he's doing it in a way that makes you appear to be the problem. But Sarah, People who are actually having psychotic breaks don't usually have this level of insight into their situation. The sessions with Dr. Rodriguez became Sarah's lifeline over the next 2 weeks. But more importantly, Dr. Rodriguez made a suggestion that changed everything. "You need to document everything," she said. "Not for your divorce case, for law enforcement. What you've described isn't just infidelity and gaslighting. It's financial fraud on a massive scale." I tried that. My divorce attorney says the evidence could be interpreted different ways. Family court and federal court have different standards. In family court, it's your word against his. In federal court, financial crimes speak for themselves. That afternoon, Sarah called the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Special Agent Maria Santos agreed to meet after Sarah explained the scope of the alleged fraud. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Los Angeles, where Sarah laid out everything she had discovered. $12 million in marital assets moved to offshore accounts without your knowledge, Agent Santos repeated, reviewing Marcus's financial investigation. That's wire fraud at minimum. If he used falsified documents to get you to sign away business interests, that's additional securities fraud. But will anyone believe me? My own family thinks I'm having a breakdown. Agent Santos looked up from the documents. Mrs. Sterling, federal agents don't care about your family drama or what the tabloids are saying. We care about evidence. And this? She tapped the financial records. This is evidence. The FBI investigation moved with surprising speed. Within a week, they had obtained warrants for Jack's business and personal records. What they found exceeded even Sarah's suspicions. Jack hadn't just moved money. He had created an elaborate shell company structure to hide assets from the upcoming IPO. He had also been falsifying business expenses, claiming personal costs as company deductions, and had even taken out loans using forged signatures. But the most damning evidence came from Jack's own phone records and email accounts. Agent Santos called Sarah with an update a week later. "We found communications between your husband and his mistress that are illuminating." "What do you mean?" "They discussed the timeline for your miscarriage as if it were part of their plan. Madison Pierce sent him a message saying, 'Once she loses the baby, she'll have no leverage left.' His response was, 'The stress should take care of that problem naturally.'" Sarah felt sick. "They wanted me to lose the baby. It appears they viewed your pregnancy as an obstacle to their plans. Mrs. Sterling, we'd like you to consider wearing a wire." The idea was terrifying, but Sarah agreed. If Jack thought he had won completely, he might be careless enough to confess. They arranged for Sarah to meet Jack at a restaurant, ostensibly to discuss her entering psychiatric treatment. The wire was hidden so well that Sarah barely knew she was wearing it. Jack arrived looking confident and sympathetic. He ordered for both of them and spent the first 10 minutes expressing concern for her well-being. "I know this has been hard on you," he said, "but the treatment facility I found is supposed to be excellent. You could get the help you need, and I could focus on rebuilding our life together." "What about Madison?" Jack's expression didn't change. "What about her? Are you going to keep seeing her while I'm in treatment?" "Sarah, Madison was never anything more than a friend who was trying to help during your breakdown. I know your illness has made you fixate on her, but that relationship exists only in your mind." The gaslighting was so smooth and confident that Sarah almost doubted the evidence she had seen with her own eyes. "What about her pregnancy? She's a single woman having a baby. That has nothing to do with me or us." "Jack, I saw the text messages. I know she's having your daughter." Jack leaned forward, his voice gentle and concerned. "Honey, you're doing it again. You're taking innocent interactions and creating elaborate fantasies. This is exactly why you need professional help." But then Sarah tried a different approach. If Madison's baby isn't yours, you won't mind taking a paternity test. For just a moment, Jack's mask slipped. She saw calculation, annoyance, and something that looked almost like admiration for her persistence. Of course not, he said finally. I'll take any test you want after you complete your treatment program. After treatment, always after she had been declared mentally incompetent. What about the money, Jack? The $12 million you moved to offshore. Accounts. This time, Jack's reaction was more pronounced. His jaw tightened and his eyes went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. The shell companies, the forged documents, the loans against our house. Jack was quiet for a long moment, studying her face intently. You're more resourceful than I gave you credit for, he said finally. So you admit it. I admit that you've been busy playing detective instead of getting the help you need. Jack's voice was still gentle, but there was steel underneath it. Sarah, you're never going to win this fight. I've been planning for every contingency for over a year. You have no money, no credibility, and no support system. Your best option is to accept treatment and hope I'm feeling generous when you get out. The naked threat was stunning in its casualness. And if I don't, Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you'll discover just how far I'm willing to go to protect my new family. As they left the restaurant, Jack kissed Sarah's cheek with the same mechanical affection she had grown to recognize. I hope you make the right choice, he said, for both our sakes. That evening, Agent Santos listened to the recording with obvious satisfaction. That's not quite a confession, but it's close. Combined with the financial evidence, we have enough to arrest him. Tomorrow, we're coordinating with several agencies, IRS for tax fraud, SEC for securities violations, and local authorities for the forged documents. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. What happens to me when he realizes I'm cooperating with the FBI? He'll be in federal custody. But Mrs. Sterling, you should be prepared. He's going to claim this is all part of your mental breakdown. His lawyers will argue that you've manufactured evidence or manipulated investigators. Sarah nodded. She expected nothing less. But for the first time in months, she wasn't fighting alone. The arrest happened at dawn. FBI agents surrounded Jack's Malibu house, the house that had been Sarah's home until he changed the locks, and took him into custody as he was leaving for his morning run. The media coverage was immediate and overwhelming. Tech billionaire arrested in massive fraud scheme dominated every news outlet, accompanied by photos of Jack in handcuffs being led to a federal vehicle. But Jack's response was exactly what Agent Santos had predicted. By noon, his high-powered legal team had held a press conference painting the arrest as the result of his wife's mental breakdown and vindictive manipulation of federal investigators. Mr. Sterling is the victim of a disturbed individual who has spent months making increasingly elaborate false accusations, his lawyer announced. We will demonstrate that these charges stem from fabricated evidence created by someone suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. The narrative was compelling and received significant media coverage. Several commentators suggested that the FBI had been manipulated by an unstable woman seeking revenge against her successful husband. But then Madison Pierce made a critical mistake. Apparently unaware that Jack had been arrested, she posted a photo on Instagram from the maternity ward of Cedars-Sinai Hospital, cradling a newborn baby girl. The caption read, "Welcome to the world, baby Sterling. Daddy can't wait to meet you officially." The post was screenshot and shared thousands of times within hours, providing concrete proof that Jack had been lying about his relationship with Madison. When confronted by reporters outside the hospital, Madison initially tried to maintain Jack's story that she was just a friend, but when pressed about the baby's paternity and shown evidence of the financial fraud, she broke down completely. "I never wanted any of this to happen," she sobbed to a crowd of journalists. Jack said his wife was crazy, that she was making up stories about our relationship. He promised me that once the IPO made him rich, we could be together openly. The interview was devastating for Jack's defense. Madison revealed that she had been pressuring Jack to leave Sarah for months, and that he had convinced her the financial transfers were legitimate business restructuring. "He showed me documents proving that Sarah had agreed to everything," Madison said. "He said she was too unstable to handle money, so he was protecting their assets from her mental illness." But the most damning revelation came when Madison was asked about the timeline of her pregnancy. "Jack and I have been together for over a year," she said. "He told me from the beginning that his marriage was a business arrangement, that he and Sarah were basically roommates. When I got pregnant, he was thrilled. He said it proved we were meant to be together." The interview obliterated Jack's narrative completely. It proved that the affair had been ongoing long before Sarah's mental breakdown, that the pregnancy was planned rather than accidental, and that Jack had been systematically lying to everyone involved. Federal prosecutors moved quickly to add additional charges based on Madison's testimony and the evidence from her phone, including communications that showed Jack had been planning to flee the country after the IPO funds cleared. But the revelation that shattered Sarah completely came during Jack's detention hearing. Rebecca appeared at Sarah's hotel room that evening with tears in her eyes and a legal document in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she said before Sarah could speak. "I need to tell you something about why I doubted you." Sarah looked at the document, which appeared to be some kind of contract. "What is this?" "Jack approached me 6 months ago. He offered me an exclusive book deal about your mental breakdown and recovery. He said you were having pregnancy-related psychosis, and that documenting your journey back to health could help other families dealing with similar issues." Sarah stared at her sister in disbelief. "You made a deal with Jack?" "He convinced me that you were genuinely sick and that I could help you while also advancing my career. He showed me medical records, recordings of you talking to yourself, documentation of erratic behavior. I thought I was doing the right thing. The recordings were from when I was rehearsing confronting him. The medical records were from when I sought help for anxiety about his behavior. He manipulated everything." Rebecca was crying now. "I know. I realized it when I saw him get arrested. Sarah, he had me feeding him information about your legal strategy, your therapy sessions, everything. I thought I was helping you, but I was helping him destroy you." The betrayal by her own sister was almost more painful than Jack's deception, but it also provided a missing piece of the puzzle. It explained how Jack had always seemed one step ahead, how he had known exactly which arguments Sarah planned to make and which evidence she intended to present. "Rebecca, he turned you into an unwitting accomplice to fraud. I know. I've already spoken to the FBI. I'm testifying against him." The federal case moved swiftly once Madison and Rebecca cooperated with prosecutors. The evidence of systematic financial fraud was overwhelming, but the emotional manipulation and gaslighting added dimensions that made the case particularly compelling to jurors. Dr. Rodriguez testified about the patterns of narcissistic abuse and how they matched Jack's behavior towards Sarah. Financial experts detailed the sophisticated shell company structure Jack had created to hide assets. Technology specialists explained how Jack had installed surveillance equipment in his own home to record Sarah without her knowledge. But the most powerful testimony came from Sarah herself. Taking the witness stand, she was composed and factual, walking the jury through the timeline of discovery, from finding the earring to realizing the scope of the financial fraud. "I want to be clear about something," she said during cross-examination. I did experience anxiety and depression during this period. I did seek therapy and medication, but that was because I was being systematically gaslit and financially abused by someone I trusted completely. My emotional distress was a rational response to an irrational situation. Jack's defense attorney tried to paint her as vindictive and unstable, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The recordings of Jack's conversations with Madison, the financial records, and the testimony of multiple witnesses created an undeniable picture of elaborate fraud and manipulation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, securities fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Jack was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution of all stolen assets plus penalties. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: peace. The reporters shouted questions about her feelings, her plans, whether she felt vindicated. But Sarah's statement was brief and focused on the future rather than the past. "I'm grateful that justice was served," she said. "But more importantly, I'm grateful that I learned to trust my own perceptions and fight for the truth, even when everyone around me suggested I was wrong." As she walked away from the courthouse, Sarah thought about the woman she had been 18 months ago, trusting, naive, and completely unprepared for the capacity humans had for systematic cruelty. That woman was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, more self-reliant, and infinitely wiser about the difference between love and manipulation. 1 year after Jack's sentencing, Sarah stood in the conference room of the Sterling Foundation, a non-profit organization she had established to help women recognize and escape financial abuse. The name was intentional, a way of reclaiming something Jack had tried to destroy while turning it into a force for good. "We've helped over 300 women in our first year," reported Maria Santos, who had left the FBI to become the Foundation's chief operating officer. "The legal clinic has recovered over $8 million in stolen assets, and our therapy program has a 93% success rate in helping women rebuild their lives." Sarah nodded, reviewing the quarterly report. The foundation had grown beyond her wildest expectations, funded partly by the restitution she had received from Jack's conviction and partly by donations from women who had experienced similar abuse. "What about the book project?" Sarah asked. Rebecca, who now served as the foundation's communications director, looked up from her laptop. "The publisher loves the manuscript. They want to fast-track it for a fall release." The book, titled After the Night a Survivor's Guide to Financial Abuse, had been a collaborative effort between the sisters. Rebecca's investigative skills and Sarah's personal experience had created something that was both deeply personal and practically useful for other women facing similar situations. "Are you sure you're ready for the publicity?" Rebecca asked. "Once this comes out, you'll be in the public eye again." Sarah considered the question. The media attention around Jack's trial had been intense, but ultimately supportive once the truth emerged. Still, putting her story out there as a published book felt like a bigger step. "I think so. If it helps even one woman recognize the signs earlier than I did, it's worth it." After the meeting, Sarah drove to her new home, a modest house in Santa Monica that she had chosen for its proximity to the ocean and its lack of resemblance to the Malibu mansion she had shared with Jack. The house was small, but perfectly suited to her new life. The nursery had been converted into a home office where she worked on foundation business and writing projects. The living room was comfortable rather than impressive. Everything reflected her actual preferences rather than someone else's image of success. As she prepared dinner, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Rodriguez. "Hi, Elena. How are things?" "Good. I'm calling because I have a referral for you, but this one is different." Sarah had been accepting occasional clients, women in situations similar to what she had experienced who needed someone who truly understood the specific dynamics of narcissistic financial abuse. Different how she's not a client, she's a potential volunteer. Her name is Ana Martinez, and her situation was remarkably similar to yours. Tech executive husband, systematic financial fraud, pregnancy used as a vulnerability. She's about 6 months out from her own legal victory and wants to help other women. Send me her information. I'd love to meet her. After hanging up, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been isolated, discredited, and fighting for basic survival. Now she was part of a community of women who had not only survived similar experiences, but had transformed their trauma into a force for protecting others. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. On her doorstep stood a delivery person holding a large bouquet of flowers. Sarah Matthews. Yes, Sarah signed for the flowers, puzzled about who might be sending them. The card was addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside, the message was brief. Congratulations on the foundation's success. You've taken something terrible and made it beautiful. A friend. There was no name. But somehow, Sarah knew exactly who had sent them. Madison Pierce had served a brief sentence for her role in the fraud and had since disappeared from public view. This was likely her way of acknowledging what had happened without reopening wounds. Sarah arranged the flowers in a simple vase and placed them on her kitchen table. They were beautiful, white roses mixed with baby's breath, and their presence felt like a small act of closure. That evening, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the sunset over the Pacific. The ocean had always brought her peace, even during the darkest days of her legal battle. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. Hi, Sarah. This is Ana Martinez. Dr. Rodriguez gave me your information. Would you be free for coffee this week? I think we have a lot to talk about. Sarah smiled and typed back, Absolutely. I'd love to meet you. As she sent the message, Sarah realized that her story wasn't really about Jack's betrayal or even her victory over his systematic abuse. It was about learning that strength didn't come from never being hurt. It came from healing in a way that helped others heal too. The foundation, the book, the community of survivors she had built, all of it had grown from the ashes of the naive woman who had once believed that good intentions were always rewarded with good outcomes. That woman had been wrong about a lot of things, but she had been right about the most important thing: everyone deserved to be treated with honesty, respect, and genuine love. And now Sarah was helping other women learn to recognize the difference between real love and elaborate performance. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah pulled a light sweater around her shoulders and remained on the porch, grateful for the quiet evening and the hard-won peace that came with knowing she had survived something designed to destroy her. More than survived, she had transformed it into something meaningful. In the distance, she could hear the sound of waves meeting the shore in an endless, reliable rhythm. It was the sound of things continuing, of cycles completing and beginning again, of the patient work of time and water reshaping even the hardest surfaces. Sarah closed her eyes and listened, planning her next day, her next month, her next year of helping women find their way back to their own voices. The perfect life she had once thought she wanted was gone forever. The real life she had built to replace it was infinitely more valuable. And tomorrow, she would wake up and continue the work of turning survival into service, and trauma into triumph.